Hi, this is Dusty King with King and King, and I'm here with D. Wright with The Starting Place. As you may know, I'm one of the founding members of King and King PLC, and a substantial part of our practice deals with family law, such as divorce or establishing permanent parenting plans for kids, those type of issues. But although certainly we can give you pretty good advice when it comes to the legal side of things, there are a lot of issues that people deal with that the law is just not equipped to handle. And for those issues, we're asking for some tips from Miss Wright here. And one of those that I want to talk about today is coping with fear as you're going through a divorce. D, in my practice, I've seen many occasions where, and I'll give you a quick example. You may have a husband and wife going through a divorce. Maybe the husband was the sole breadwinner in the house. Maybe he just made substantially more than the wife. But the wife is asking for alimony, and the husband may feel like it's an exorbitant amount of alimony, and she's just doing it to try to pay him back or get back at him. When the reality is she's just afraid. Because all of a sudden her world is changing. Her financial situation is changing. Things that she relied on him for, not just the financial stuff, but the other things that's
changing
gone. That's right. It's changing. So what I see is, a lot of it is just fear based, which is certainly understandable when you're going through a divorce. What advice can you give someone going through a divorce to, number one, help themselves cope with that kind of fear, but number two, helping possibly that other side acknowledge that this may not be coming from where I think it's coming from. It may be coming from a place of fear and of the unknown.
We've talked a little bit before about anger, and about anger comes from being hurt. And keep in mind where the marriage started. It started with "I love yous."
Right.
And it started with a promise.
Right.
And so somewhere along the way, the promise got broken. For whatever reason, your fault, my fault, nobody's fault. It just got broken. And so when we're thinking about a divorce, we're thinking about, okay, here we are, but this isn't where we've always been.
Right.
You've not always been this person that hurt me to this degree. You've not always been this person who, God only knows what the situation might be.
Right.
But they've not always been that person. At some point, you trusted that person, and you trusted them to be someone who had your back, who had your best interest at heart. And now all of a sudden, you're torn, and there's this real conflict when it comes to divorce in someone's heart. There's the conflict of, this is the person I married, and this is who's standing in front of me.
Right.
And oftentimes we hurt each other on purpose during a divorce. I know that's news to you, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. Never happens. Never seen it.
So oftentimes you have this conflict of just not being able to wrap our heads around, how can this be the same person that was here?
Right.
And so trying to get your head around that is just confusion. And then you come into this place where you start to realize, what's my life really going to look like without them? And unfortunately, it happens a lot of times when they get to mediation.
That's right.
And so then they start to realize, and then they might start to second guess and wish they hadn't gone this far, or wish they hadn't gone this route, or just not know what to do. And my advice would be, and a lot of times they come to me first before they come to you.
Right.
And they're saying, I think that my marriage is over, and that's some of the stuff that I talked to them about. I said, okay, now just imagine for a minute, if you had a flat tire on the side of the interstate, who would you call? Now that seems simple, and it seemed kind of nothing. I would naturally call my husband.
Right.
But if the husband is not there,
who's your backup?
Who's your backup? What's your life going to look like without him in your life? Because your life is more than just who lives in your house. It's more than just who you sleep with at night.
Right.
It's more than who's going to change the light bulb. There's all kinds of things that happen where
Right.
we need, just needing a sounding board.
Mm-hmm.
People that that ultimately you would ideally come home and talk to your spouse about whatever happened during your day, or if something frustrated you and all these things. Who's that going to be?
Right.
But thinking about that in a way that kind of gives you an idea of what life will look like. Every time, if you're thinking about divorce,
Mm-hmm.
every time you pick up the phone to call your spouse, what if they weren't there?
Okay.
Put the phone back down and just see, what if they're not there? If you're in the midst of it and
Mhm.
you're already neck deep in the divorce and you're realizing, oh my goodness, here I am,
Right.
then the idea would be you need that support group. If you don't have a support yet, just
Mhm.
a group of people that surround you and encourage you and help you when things are hard,
Mm-hmm.
then get you one. Lots of people get that from church,
Right.
but it doesn't have to come to church from church. But lots of people have small groups in church now and just
Right.
Sunday school classes or whatever, and they start to call them and say, help me figure this out, what this is going to look like. Can I really do this? The worst thing, in my opinion, that you could do is run right out and marry someone else.
I agree with that. It's the old adage of the rebound, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of truth to that.
Oh, what a mess.
Right. Let's look at the other side of the coin for just a second, because and typically I see this coming from women
Mm-hmm.
more than I do men, and I think there's going to be a logic behind that. I have instances where we're neck deep in the divorce, and we're going through the issues of the divorce, and the wife will look at me and say, well, but he's going to need this, or he's going to need that, or he doesn't, and I sometimes joke with him, but it's obvious that she's the one that's taking care of everything.
Mm-hmm.
She may have been the one that paid all the bills. She's the one that took care of, not that he didn't have a hand in taking care of the kids, but when we start talking about the business side of the
Right.
marriage, that's usually been her. And I've had men that I've represented that barely even knew how much money they made, because I always get that, well, she handled all that. She handled all
Yeah.
that. So if you're the wife in a situation like that, and a lot of times I have to look at them and say, well, that's just not your problem anymore. But how can they break that from themselves? Because they still want to take care of him,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be he still wants to take care of her,
Mm-hmm.
but we're getting a divorce at this point. So things are changing, and that other person needs to now stand on their own 2 feet. So do you have any tips for that situation?
A lot of times and it's just habit. A lot of times where you just, I've always done it. Pick up the phone and they're on the side of the road with the flat. Well, yeah, I'll be there in a minute.
Mhm.
And they just do it because it's what they've done. But a lot of people get a divorce, don't they, and just not hate each other? I mean, don't some people get a
Some
divorce
people
and
do.
not hate each other?
Right.
Okay, and they just agree to go separate ways, and they just have different lives, and they just
Right,
work
and
it
some
out.
of them can still get along very well, and
Right.
they may still be that person that when they're on the side of the road they call to fix the flat.
Right, and just be glad that somebody, some people, in my opinion, just feel set free from the chaos, and they're like, whew, thank goodness all that's over. I can just go on with my life now, or create a life. But the people who are still codependent in those relationships, in that they're trying to still care for that person, it's going to take them a minute
Mm-hmm.
to figure out, oh wait, that's not my problem. Because when you said, I have to tell them, well, that's not your problem anymore, that's going to be a shocker to some people,
Okay.
because they hadn't thought about that.
Right.
Because I think it's kind of like marriage. When people decide to get married, getting married is easy. Staying married is a whole different ball of wax.
True.
When people talk about getting a divorce would be the easier part, going on with your life. And if let's just say they've been married 30 years.
Right.
Getting a divorce would be one thing, but living a life without that person you've been with for 30 years is a whole nother something.
Because like you said, routine deals with a lot of
Routine,
this.
Yeah.
routine of that person has been there every day
Absolutely.
for 30 years, that's going to take some getting used to.
It just is. And I think that it's just going to take some, they're going to have to show themselves some grace and just realize, okay, this is hard. This is different.
And be patient with themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I think having a support group of people who are going to remind you of that and who are going to pull you back in when you start trying to take care of someone, you know, the ex or whatever. I have people right now that I've seen that where they'll tell me that they're divorced or they're getting a divorce, but the wife is still calling them wanting this, that, or the other, or wanting advice on this, that, or the other, and they just don't know how to be divorced.
Right.
And I think that's a real thing.
Yes, it is.
I think that people, when they get married, don't really know how to be married to this particular whoever you're marrying at the time. But I think people don't know how to be divorced either.
Well, when you choose that support group, because I find situations sometimes where you get that person. Well, if it were me, I would do this. If it were me, I would do that. And sometimes that can be toxic to the individual. So how do you choose your support group? How do you choose those people?
You choose people who understand that they weren't married to that person and that they're not in your head and they have no idea what they would do, but are willing to admit they have no idea what they would do.
Okay.
So you want people who understand that, wow, this must be hard, and can be supportive and can understand it's okay for them to say, I don't know what you need to do, but I'll support you whatever you decide. Because divorce, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, to me, divorce is a time where lots of things are both right and wrong at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if it's right and wrong at the same time, there's no clearly defined thing, here's how you do this.
Right.
We know that when you get a divorce, you go to a lawyer. Right?
Right.
Okay. But that's just the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And can it get really drawn out?
It can get drawn out. It can be short and sweet, or it can be really drawn out.
All depending on those two people, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
So
and I tell
was
people,
the marriage.
I tell people a lot of times, and usually it's, well, how much is this going to cost? I don't know how much it's going to cost you. Because, when, you're paying me by the hour, and so much of what it's going to cost my client has to do with the other person.
Absolutely.
And what they're going to want to do or not be willing to do.
Absolutely.
And so there's no good answer to that question.
And isn't that the truth also with how you need to handle something?
Yes.
It depends on the other person.
It depends on the other person. Negotiations, the whole 9 yards,
Absolutely.
It depends on the other person.
And so when someone is saying, well, if that was me, I would, well, they don't have any idea what they're talking about.
That's
because
right.
they don't know that other person, your mate, whoever that is, as well as you do.
And I would tell people, when you're going through your situation, whatever that situation is, and you hear about, your cousin's best friend's nephew somewhere else who they think went through a similar situation that you're going through, and this happened, I can guarantee you it wasn't a similar situation.
Yeah.
It's not your situation. Each situation is unique.
It is.
The parties and the people involved in that situation are unique. You really can't compare the two.
Right.
So that's good advice, that you need someone who's going to be supportive without interjecting their opinions
Right.
on what should happen or shouldn't happen.
Right. And I think that's, a lot of that comes with maturity.
Right.
Where you start to, as we age, we start to figure out that there's a whole lot of crap we don't know anything about.
Right. I routinely see people as part of their support group, maybe their parents. And my experience is I would warn people, not that you shouldn't lean on your parents, because they're typically the ones that are always going to be there for you, but just understand and recognize they're going through their own emotional issues with a divorce, because
that's a very good point.
they trusted the other person too. They welcomed at least you would hope, they welcome that other person into the family, and they're going through emotional issues too. So
Yeah.
sometimes they may not be the perfect person to bounce things off of because they've got their own issues with this topic.
You know, the other side of that too, Dusty, is that parents tend to see their children always as though they're this tall,
That's true.
as though they are their children.
Right.
They
Doesn't
are
matter
their
how old you
children.
are,
That's
you're still their baby.
That's right. And so you see that. That's why mamas cry at weddings
Mm-hmm.
because their baby is getting married.
Right.
That's why mamas cry at graduations. That's why right there, because their mama sees them as a very small child. And that'll be the same way. God forbid it. That'll be the same way at the funeral.
Right.
Mama will see that's her baby that just died. You know.
Right.
And so, anytime, while sometimes you have parents that actually can separate the emotion from the business of it, like you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
lots of times you don't. They're seeing their child hurting,
Right.
and they're hearing their child cry, and there's nothing they can do to fix that.
Which for parents, that triggers something.
That's a helplessness that nobody likes.
That's right, and that's why I say a lot of times the parents. And again, I don't want to dissuade people from talking to their parents if they're going through a divorce,
right,
but just
absolutely.
understand that this is your mom and dad, and
They can't be unbiased.
they can't be unbiased, and you know they've always been willing to go to bat for you. And I mean, you know, we
Right,
joke about the
right.
mama bear syndrome, but I mean it's a real thing. I mean
Uh-huh.
that people
Sure
will
is.
fight a Mack truck, you know, for their kids.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so just keep that in mind. Well, Dee, I appreciate your time today, and we're going to have Dee's contact information at the conclusion of the video. And if you feel like you want to have some one-on-one time with Dee, I'm sure she'll be happy to talk with you about that. But again, my name's Dusty King, and with King & King PLC, this is Dee Wright with The Starting Place, and we'll see you next time.